not in charge anymore. Where the hell's disaster services?
Run on, Will you may run on for a long time.
This is 13-year-old testosterone high-fiving for sure. There's no doubt about it.
Later that'll cut you down. Will you know I've been
Who was telling the RCMP what to do? Who was in charge?
I think it was a learning opportunity for people who didn't know a thing about emergency measures.
And my heart stood still when he said, son, go and do my will.
Welcome to this Sun News special presentation, Broken Trust, the Fallout. When someone brings up High River, Alberta, a couple of thoughts normally come to mind. Its majestic view and beautiful surroundings in the ranches of the foothills of Alberta's Rockies, and the town's incredible strength as a community. But after the summer of 2013, there were two other things it became known for: a tragic and devastating flood, and how the town allegedly suffered a stunning abuse of power. Sun News has been following the story since the beginning, and first chronicled it a year ago with our documentary, Broken Trust. Over the next hour, we're going to show you what we've learned about the RCMP since then, and the investigation into their actions. But first, a quick recap about what happened, and the details behind what was notoriously known as the High River gun grab. The first rain started to fall on June 20th, 2013. By the time the alarms had been sounded a day later, the people of High River were already knee-deep in one of the worst natural disasters in Canadian history. The region was pummeled, half a year's worth of rain in less than 48 hours. The storm caused the nearby Highwood River to burst its banks. From historic Main Street to neighborhoods as far as 2 kilometers away from the river, floodwaters rampaged through the town, at one point surrounding the community of 13,000. Enough water to fill 3,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
There is no doubt that infrastructure is being impacted, that people's homes are being impacted, and the Alberta Emergency Management Agency is fully engaged in coordinating the work of government actions to support local communities and local decision-making.
32 communities across southern Alberta were rocked by torrential waters. Rail lines were twisted. Entire parking lots of pickup trucks and school buses were submerged. Tens of thousands of homes were damaged or destroyed. Yet no place suffered more than High River.
What you don't understand is we don't have a flood. We have a disaster. This is a major disaster we're dealing with.
This was something that was completely out of our control, unexpected.
When the flood began, members of Canada's military rushed to High River, helping the relief efforts. 4 days after the flood started, they announced all 5,000 buildings were clear. The search and rescue was finished. No more threat to life or limb. Like so many Albertans, the people of High River were forced to leave their homes behind because of the rising flood. But unlike the others, there was no answer to when they could return or what they would be returning to.
We were depending on our government and our police to protect us. And that is what you said you were doing by keeping us out of the town.
It's also important for us to get the business community going so that when you get there and you're looking for repairs to your home, you have a hardware store that's open, you have a grocery store that's got food on it, you got a drugstore that's open for your medical supplies.
It's only a little ways away. We don't need all that stuff.
But by booting in our doors and taking our things, you made us feel less safe, and in fact, you also made us, in effect, less safe.
Hey, you're not in charge anymore. Where the hell's disaster services?
By the 8th day, most of the waters had receded from High River, yet swarms of Mounties were still arriving, with barricades, spike belts, and a disturbing message.
There is a lot of frustration in High River.
It came to a head yesterday as word spread among High River residents. The RCMP had seized hundreds of guns from evacuated homes.
Yeah, this morning we are in front of the RCMP Southern Alberta headquarters. looking for more answers regarding the seizure of firearms in High River.
Yes, I can confirm it. And now they told us they've gone into some homes a third time, and they're going there specifically to search and seize weapons and ammunition.
RCMP officers stunningly revealed that they were entering homes, some more than once, kicking down doors, smashing windows, and seizing firearms.
We had guns in a safe that my husband brought up. The two that didn't work, he left on the stairs, and those were taken. The ones that did work, and I don't know how many he had, but they were registered at one point, took up to our bedroom, in our closet, behind some clothes, behind a guitar. Those were not just standing around.
The RCMP initially claimed it was acting without orders. But according to documents obtained by Sun News, the RCMP now claim they were acting to keep the peace, removing only illegally stored firearms, acting, or so they now say, with the full power of the law, even though they were acting without warrants. Many people in High River believe what the RCMP did was anything but legal.
I was told these searches were reasonable, but my home was in a non-affected flood area, didn't have any water, didn't lose power or water service the whole time, but yet they kicked in my door to the point where it was laying on the floor, couldn't even be re-secured. So my house was left open for looters, for the elements, for animals or anything.
Could this be right? Could our laws allow the RCMP to take complete control under a state of emergency? No. Yet some officials claim that the RCMP was justified in what it did.
I did a press conference in High River where I announced why people couldn't go back into the town. I talked about all the risks associated with the health risks, the physical risks to people, and immediately following that I had an individual come up to me behind the cameras afterwards and say there will be civil disobedience if you don't let us back in 24 hours. Griffith says the Mounties were within earshot of this conversation. I was in the other 29 communities. I never had one threat like that. But there was a lot of frustration, and I'm saying there's a lot of frustration, but the RCMP have to take precautions, and people can say they targeted it, that community. I think it was just a matter of making sure that there was public safety.
In the name of public safety, Mounties smashed their way into more than 1/3 of the 3,700 homes in High River, destroying private property, stomping on rights and liberties along the way. More than 600 firearms were seized, along with $250,000 worth of ammunition. So who gave the orders? The direction?
That image of the RCMP has done a swan dive, and this did nothing to help. We have 2 on our street. Every door has been booted in but 2. You want to guess which 2?
And I don't want to get this person in trouble, but when I asked him why 2 of my doors were booted in that weren't locked, he gave me a wry little smile and he said, "Les, there's no better feeling than booting in a door."
Still now, no one from the RCMP has explained why the town of High River was targeted for guns. After all, the seizure of firearms hadn't occurred in any other community affected by the flood. A report from a civilian commission investigating the Mounties was expected in October of 2013. It's more than a year later now, and still nothing. At last word, the commission says the document will be released in early 2015. Until then, the town of High River will keep waiting for justice, for trust to be restored. In a recent statement to Sun News, the Commission says the delay is due to the vast amount of documentation and evidence it continues to dig up, but that the report is nearly finished. Adding, investigators merely want to ensure that they have all the facts, and they are committed to producing an accurate and comprehensive report on the RCMP's actions. There have been a number of key developments to this story since the flood. In this special presentation, we'll look at how the town is coping today. We'll also hear from best-selling author and investigator Paul Palongo on why the legacy of the RCMP may have fueled the situation in High River. Up next, an exclusive one-on-one interview with one man who's made it his crusade to find out the truth about what happened. That and more, still ahead.
Well, you may run on for a long time. Sooner or later, God'll cut you down. Sooner or later, God'll cut you down. Run on. Run on. Run on. Well, you may run on.
Welcome back. Think back to September of last year in High River and that explosive town hall about the RCMP's actions during the flood. There were a lot of people who were pretty angry at what was going on, especially Dennis Young. The retired Mountie and ex-Parliament Hill staffer was at that meeting that day, and he's been focused on finding out the truth ever since. He joins me now from Calgary. Dennis, thank you so much for coming in this evening to talk about High River. I want to ask you first, okay, so on the day that a guy named Brian Topham, a sergeant from north central Alberta, comes down, stands at the barricades for the RCMP and says that they're seizing guns, what was your first reaction?
Well, this was 8 days into the flood, after the flood, and this is the first we heard that they were actually seizing guns. I couldn't believe that. What's the point of seizing guns when your highest priority is rescuing stranded residents of High River? The guns seizures didn't make any sense to me at all, and the red flag started flying right immediately. I started following the media, in particular a video that they released, the RCMP released on the 28th of June 2013. It was a video of them searching a home. The RCMP and the Canadian Armed Forces floating up to a home. It didn't show them kicking in the door. It conveniently left that out of the video. And it showed, and in that video it said that they had located all the firearms. There was a radio transmission that said they had located all the firearms. Well, what were they doing? It looked like they were looking, they were searching for firearms from some kind of list. They had located all the firearms. So right then, I started filing access to information requests.
And I have to say, it's been tremendous work, because most of what we know about what went on, it comes from your access to information and FOIP requests. But have you come to the conclusion that the RCMP were looking for guns, that this went on much longer than the water emergency, because somehow the RCMP got it in their heads that ordinary civilians with firearms were a threat to public safety?
That's exactly true. They were seizing guns right up till July 10th. Here we are 20 days after the flood, and they're still seizing guns. Some of the people had even been allowed back into their homes at that time. So it was obvious there was some kind of law enforcement activity, some kind of overarching law enforcement activity going on in High River. They were seizing ammunition. They were seizing magazines for firearms. They were seizing crossbows. They were seizing, they went and destroyed 3.5 tons of ammunition. The access to information requests don't come close to documenting where these tons of ammunition came from.
You know, they took down the doors in 754 of about 3,700 homes in High River. That's 21% of the homes in town had their doors kicked in the name of public safety. And you know, the reason I come to the conclusion that they were just looking for guns is that they went to houses that weren't affected by the flood. They went to some houses 2 and 3 times until they found guns, and then didn't go back. They went to houses where people had said, they'd phoned the emergency services or the Red Cross and said, there's no one left in the home. You don't have to worry about searching our house because we know it's empty. There aren't any survivors. And they went looking in places where survivors couldn't hide, like underwear drawers.
Exactly. They even kicked in doors inside houses. They kicked in doors to sheds in the backyards. The handwritten notes of the RCMP are quite revealing when you go through them line by line. The most alarming case is Don and Jane White's house. They had left 3 messages with the RCMP and different locations that they were out of their home and safely living with relatives in Okotoks. And yet, the same day that the Department of National Defense said that there is no further risk to life and limb in High River, Alberta, the same night, that night, the RCMP drove their boat from the detachment to Don and Jane White's house, kicked in their door, searched their house, and I mean really searched their house. There was mud on their bed, mud on their bedside tables. It was just
Dennis,
unbelievable.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank you so much for coming in tonight. I also want to thank you, and I'm sure lots of our viewers would, for the magnificent work you've been doing in uncovering the truth in this travesty in High River.
I want to thank Sun News for making it public. Without you, it wouldn't, we wouldn't know what's going on.
What Dennis has been uncovering about the RCMP may surprise some of you. But our next guest says these allegations aren't too uncharacteristic at all, considering the history of the Mounties. We'll show you why.
Well, you may run on for a long time. Sooner or later, gotta.
You're watching a Sun News special, Broken Trust, The Fallout. For some people across Canada, the RCMP is as much of a symbol of the country as the maple leaf. They give out traffic tickets and are tasked with protecting many of our towns and neighborhoods. But the RCMP also has a very dark past, and shining a light on their history may explain some of the elements in High River. Paul Palongo specializes in RCMP issues. He's the best-selling author of Above the Law, The Last Guardians, and Dispersing the Fog. He joins me now. You know, I came to this investigation somewhat reluctantly because I like to think that the Mounties are, you know, Sergeant Preston and Red Surge, and I remember reading the first of your books almost 20 years ago now and thinking, well, he can't possibly be right, but you've been proven right, and my trust kind of misplaced by events that have taken place not just in High River but across the country. Are there a couple of things that you know you thought of when you heard about the High River gun grab that reminded you of past instances where the RCMP have done the wrong thing?
Well, nothing surprises me about the RCMP, and I think, as you said, I've spent 20 years sort of advocating this position that I came to in a very difficult way too. I didn't start out thinking that, oh, the RCMP is a dysfunctional police force. I looked at the RCMP as being a highly effective police force in the 60s and 70s and wondered why things had started to go wrong in the 80s. And that's the 3 books were basically written to answer that question, how this force became such a dysfunctional, politicized police force.
And I mean, I have my own theory about why that happened. In the mid-'80s, they became part of the bureaucratic structure in Ottawa. They came under the Solicitor General's Department. Is that part of it? What other things contributed, do you think?
Well, the force, yes, it became politicized in 1984 when the commissioner was made a deputy minister, deputy solicitor general. But the larger fundamental problem with the RCMP is that the way it is organized, that this force appears to be a federal police force. It really is largely a rental provincial police force outside of Ontario and Quebec, and that there's no real accountability at either level, at the federal level or at the provincial level. And the force tends to operate with, under the RCMP Act as being its guiding act, and the commissioner has all the power. Then there's virtually no accountability in this force, and it's done everything over the years it can to avoid accountability.
I think particularly interesting for me is what you just touched on, which is this sort of gap, or this brokenness in the RCMP structure, where most people in Canada know the RCMP as the guys who are at the detachment on a cold January night, and after they're done their shift, they'll come down to the bar and have a drink with them, or they'll play on the rec hockey, or they see them at their kids' soccer games, standing on the sidelines with all the other parents. And then something like this happens in High River, which isn't then dealt with on that local level. Suddenly you have people from the division level, in Alberta, the K Division Command, you have the regional people within the division, you have national headquarters, and it starts to act more like a national police force, perhaps at exactly the time it should be acting most like a local police force.
And that is the problem. Like, you know, that all the issues that have been raised about this force over the, you know, the past 20, 30 years have never really been addressed. When the opportunity came in Alberta, for example, to do something about it and maybe question, you know, the renewal of their contract in 2012, Alberta and Saskatchewan just jumped right into it and signed it before any examination of the performance or any sort of contemplation of alternatives, setting up their own provincial police force, for example. Never happened because there's like this magic thing goes on where the RCMP, like some celebrity, when you question it, all the sycophants rally around it and immediately protect the force. And I don't understand why that is. I mean, there's plenty of evidence to show that something should have been done in 2012 in Alberta and Saskatchewan about the way this force behaved and the lack of accountability of that force to the people of Alberta.
Is there a way forward for this? I mean, I know lots of people have said that the RCMP does what like 17 separate law enforcement agencies in the United States do. Should they be broken up? Should there be stronger civilian oversight? Is it blow it up or reform it?
Well, I think you have to make it strictly a federal police force. I mean, right now, people have this sort of fond memories of the musical ride, I call it, and the RCMP being this great police force. But really, the municipal police forces in Canada, the OPP, are the big police forces. And the RCMP, the largest communities they police are the suburbs of Vancouver and Moncton, New Brunswick. Otherwise, they're the dicks from the sticks, basically. And that has to be rectified. They're not the premier police force in Canada. They're politically controlled, but they have far too much power both internally in government operations, the Solicitor General's Department, former RCMP officers, and they get their way all the time.
Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
More ahead on this Sun News special, Broken Trust, the Fallout. We'll be back after the break.
I don't think that the government should be able to break in your door on what was the guise of making sure there was nobody in the houses, but in actuality they were taking people's weapons, and that's wrong.
If I just saw one person's head roll, this one lieutenant made all the decisions, and now he's been fired and we're moving on and we're a better force. That wouldn't really do it for me.
You know, what should be done, a precedent should be set whereby, you know, that doesn't happen again, because people are going to be on their guard now.
We're not forgetting. I'm not forgetting. Half the people I talk to in town aren't forgetting.
And they're supposed to be looking after us, government and RCMP. It's not happening.
Do I feel like they've slighted me, like they've kind of thrown their garbage in my yard? Yeah, a little bit, and I kind of like them to come pick it up a little bit. I have to be able to trust my RCMP, otherwise it's all for naught. If I can't trust them, then what are they there for? They're not public servants if I can't trust them.
Welcome back to this Sun News special, Broken Trust, the Fallout. Just a few sound bites from some of the people in High River we spoke with. You can clearly see and hear the frustration. One of the reasons why this story has been so popular with our viewers is because of where it happened. Many across the country can relate to High River and its people. And the actions of the RCMP have them wondering, could it happen to us? Ross, you watched the fallout from the High River gun grab from a distance. What, as a former sworn police officer, bothered you about the RCMP's procedures?
Well, you can hear in those clips from those citizens of the community that they've lost trust. You know, where you establish trust is, what are you going to do when I'm not watching you? Do I feel confident if I give you my bank card and my PIN, you're not going to abuse it, I can rest, right? Or am I concerned about you? So that's part of it. The other part is, if you do something and you make a mistake, you use your judgment, but you're wrong, will you come and tell me what you did, why you did it, and why the mistake happened, and say, look, I want to change this, I want to make it right with you, so that I can get my trust back with you? Or will you not be straightforward with me and not tell me where it all went wrong.
Yeah. See, one of the big things I worry about is a fallout from the gun grab in High River is that, you know, if there's going to be a flood in northern Ontario, there's going to be a hurricane that hits the coast of Nova Scotia, there's going to be an earthquake on Vancouver Island, that when the police come the next time and say, please, would you move along? We need to clear out this community for your own safety. Also, because we're going to have emergency operations in here, and it's tricky if there are a bunch of civilians around. Would you please leave? I'm worried that there are going to be not a few dozen people, as there were in High River, who wouldn't leave. There are going to be hundreds or thousands of people who won't leave, and that's going to complicate the necessary work of first responders.
It will. With police, you work with the people when they work with you. There isn't generally in most communities maybe one police officer for 600 people, Lorne. And if I tell them, hey, everybody stop and go over there, if they don't trust me, they don't want to listen to me, I can't really accomplish my goal. I need them to say, okay, he's asking, come on people, let's go, there's a reason for it. He wouldn't ask otherwise. And that's the sort of trust that the police need to be able to act in emergencies when time is of the essence.
Yeah, you know, and I think you raised a very good point there. One of the most troubling things for me out of High River has been the fact that on Flood Day 4, the RCMP sent away every member of the local detachment, every member who was part of the community that they were policing, and brought in a whole bunch of people from the rest of Alberta and some of them from Saskatchewan to do what we were told in September was called the hard choices, make the hard decisions, which meant kicking down people's doors and searching private homes. Is there a problem when the police are disconnected from the community that they're supposed to be patrolling?
Yeah, there is. And there's some police officers who know a lot more and served a lot longer than I did doing things who will tell you. The first thing you do is get into your community, get to know the community, let them know you, let them know about your judgment, let them learn to trust you, let them be someone that they'll want to come to and talk to. And so that is something that you need. And police, if they have to live in that community, they will also think a little bit longer, a little bit harder about when they make their decisions to do things. You know, you can have difficulties, like you say, if you're bringing people from the outside who come in and don't really care. I'm here to do a job I've been asked to do. I don't care about you because I'm leaving after this. It's not the same level of concern you get.
Yeah. I want to go over some of the numbers too. About 3,700 of the 5,000 buildings in High River, about 3,700 private homes. We now have from the RCMP through access to information requests, confirmation that they kicked in the doors of 754 of those homes. We worked that out. It's not quite 21%. Almost 1 in 5 homes in that community that had the doors kicked down. And the kicker for me, if you pardon the pun, was after the emergency was over, after the floodwaters had started to recede, they kicked in twice as many doors as before. That's got to be odd in the annals of police history in Canada. I mean, I can't think of another situation like that.
Well, it's beyond odd. I mean, one thing most people don't realize, ingrained in Canadian law, the maximum sentence for breaking into a house, Lorne, is 25 years. It's considered your castle. That's still on the books today. 25 years if you break into someone's house, because that's the way the law has considered it. The Supreme Court has said since the Supreme Court was founded, before you enter into someone's home, if you can get a warrant, you go get a warrant. The court has not even blinked on that. And to just so cavalierly go through here without being able to present the authority, who gave the order, and why they did it, I mean, that's something every officer knows, that if I use force, I have to justify it, and I better be able to justify it as soon as I'm asked, not months later.
Well, and once the flood waters are receding, there's judges around all the time. You could have a judge in town come and set up in a tent to ask for individual warrants for individual houses. It's an atrocity. It really is. Ross, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lorne.
Scott Reid is the MP for the Ontario riding of Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington. He too is concerned about the possibility of a recurrence of this type, and has taken a big interest in what Mounties did in High River last year. He joins me now from Ottawa. Scott, thank you very much for joining us on this special. You know, you're quite a distance from High River. What is it most that prompted you to ask lengthy order paper questions earlier this year about the Mounties' activities in June and July of 2013?
Well, initially it was just the fact that there was no incumbent MP for the riding to ask the questions. There's now an incumbent, John Barlow, and he has done some follow-up questions to the ones that I asked, seeking to find information that we felt was not provided in a sufficiently fulsome answer when I asked the questions in June. But the proximate cause was the fact that the civilian review had been delayed. I think it was a second delay at that time. There's since been a further delay. We were promised the review in October. At any rate, it seemed like a good time to ask some of the questions via the order paper process, which essentially is a kind of stepped up access to information process to get some of the answers that we thought people ought to be able to know. It was at this point, after all, a year after the events. Now, I don't want to oversimplify the very detailed and thoughtful questions that you had on the order, you put on the order paper, but a couple of things that stand out to me. You asked it in a number of ways whether or not there weren't less intrusive ways, such as you know, heat imaging cameras on helicopters, that the RCMP might have used to determine whether or not there were survivors in homes. And another thing that you come back to again and again in your questions was, who gave the authority to do this? Were you satisfied with the responses that you got to either of those general themes of questions? They were helpful in some regards. We did get some additional information, but some of it was not as fulsome as we would have liked. In one example, we made an inquiry and were told, well, it would just be too much work to provide you with that information, which may actually be a legitimate answer, but I would have liked to have heard it would take us X amount of work to dig up the detailed house-by-house information you're asking for. Are you worried too, or was part of your interest out of the fact that, you know, an awful lot of the communities in your riding are similar to High River, 13,000 people, near a big city, but you know, still a nice rural feel to them, and were you worried that if there's a flood or some other kind of natural disaster that happens in your area, that people won't obey a mandatory evacuation order that comes from the police because of what happened in High River? Well, I mean, there's some obvious differences. I'm in Ontario, so we have the Ontario Provincial Police rather than the RCMP. No, I think the main worry I have here is this. This is a civil liberties issue. The police may, in fact, I would say it's almost certain that to some degree the police did overstep their legal authority. There was a great deal of unnecessary intrusiveness. Civil liberties were not respected, and normally this would attract a great deal of attention. But because it's an issue that involves firearms, although firearms is not all we're talking about here, but because it involves firearms, it didn't attract many of the usual people who are normally very concerned and legitimately concerned about civil liberties. We saw very little interest from the opposition parties, for example, in a way that I think would not have occurred had it been something that did not involve firearms. And so it seemed reasonable to try and get some more information out via the order paper question process. Scott, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I'm glad you're able to join us tonight on our special. Glad to be here. As you can see, there's still lots of questions surrounding this case. Still ahead, we'll show you the one thing that is sure to get answers from the RCMP. This is Broken Trust, The Fallout, on the Sun News Network.
Well, you may run on for long. Run on. Run on. Well, you may.
Welcome back to this Sun News special, Broken Trust, The Fallout. Almost immediately after the worst of the flood had passed in High River, some were starting to question what authorities were doing. There's little doubt government officials bungled the handling of this emergency. But once word got out that police had started seizing firearms from homes, that's when everyone wanted answers. While our investigation into this case has turned up a lot of dirt, it's not enough to uncover the full truth just yet. Rick Hemmingson is a lawyer and legal expert on matters relating to firearms and the Firearms Act. as well as property rights. He joins me now from Calgary. Rick, thanks very much.
You're welcome, Lorne.
You know, we've been beating our heads against the wall trying to find out who gave the authority to do all of this break and enter. And, you know, the numbers are staggering, and I've mentioned them already a lot of times. I'm going to mention them a lot more. 3,700 homes in High River. 754 of them had the doors broken down. That's 21% of the town. It's such a staggering number. It's hard to think that it even happened in Canada. But you've been looking at the Emergency Powers Act in Alberta. You've been looking at this case. Do you see any way that the police were justified legally in doing this?
Okay. No, I don't, Lorne. The locality of High River, under their bylaw, well, you mentioned the Emergency Management Act, I'll start there. The Emergency Management Act empowers the local council in High River with some draconian powers, including the power to order warrantless entries into buildings, but it has to follow the town's emergency management plan, and they had a plan. And I've looked at it, and nowhere in that plan does it talk about what the RCMP did. So one is left with the inevitable conclusion that either the RCMP or the local and provincial government, or some combination of them, were just making it up as they went along. And that's a very disturbing thought, particularly in an emergency where people are stressed, emotions are running high, the boat is sailing in rough waters, and nobody seems to have a chart. Canadian law is full of instances where genuine criminals have been set free for police misconduct like this. This is a dramatic, astounding episode of either the police being off the reservation completely, or some level of government, whether it's local or provincial, dropping the ball in some profound ways. Because as you said, you know, the emergent part of the flood was over in a few days, and these entries went on for another 2 weeks. We had people kept out of their homes with spike belts and armed officers. It really boggles the mind when you think about it.
Yeah. We have 30 seconds left. I just want you to speculate, if you would, please. If the Mounties had wanted to look for guns, and they wanted to do it the right way, and they went to court and they simply said, well, people are out of town and we want to go and see if they have guns in their houses, do you think a court would ever have allowed them to do that?
No, I don't. Because our law doesn't work that way. If the Mounties were afraid of the one person who, according to the Alberta minister, made a sort of a veiled threat that people were going to storm the barricades or whatever, if there's a person who presented a threat, then they may, depending on the facts, they may be able to get a warrant to look in that person's house. But no judge is going to give the RCMP a warrant to search the town.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
All right. Thank you very much, Rick. That's very helpful. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
More ahead on this Sun News special, Broken Trust, the Fallout. We'll be back after the break.
Run on, well, you may run on for a long time sooner.
Welcome back to this Sun News special presentation. Byline host Brian Lilly joins me from our Ottawa studio. Brian?
Good to see you again, Lorne, and always good to talk about this ongoing issue that just never seems to die.
Absolutely, it is. You know, one of the things, you know, we've looked during this special at all of the information that we've learned, all of the facts we've gathered over the last year since we did our special in December of 2013. But a couple of things strike me when I'm looking back at all the details. One of them is it just doesn't seem to sink in with most people in the intelligentsia in Canada that trying to control guns, which I think is where all of the RCMP action in High River comes from, this notion we have to control civilian firearms. Nobody seems to think that that's ever a bad idea.
And they don't look at evidence. It is based on emotion. It is based on feeling. And they keep coming back to that. And another thing is that when it comes to gun owners, the civil liberties that they swear they defend and protect go out the window. And so this idea of warrantless search and seizure doesn't bother them. The idea that, as William Pitt said, you know, the rain could go through the worst tenement, the wind could howl through it, but the king and his army cannot cross the threshold without warrant or permission. No, that goes out the window when it comes to gun owners. And it's all based on emotion.
Well,
none of it is based on fact.
I mean, I think that's exactly what's behind what happened in High River. I mean, you have here the 1995 Firearms Act brought in by the Liberals, which basically said it's us versus them. It's the state and those who are put in authority to protect the safety of the public against people who own guns. Doesn't matter whether you're a drug dealer or just someone who likes to hunt ducks a couple of weekends every fall. You are a threat to the public safety, and so if we kick down your doors, if we smash in your windows, if we do all of this without warrants, if we trample your rights, I mean, in the Firearms Act still, if you are a registered collector of firearms, not just an ordinary owner, you have to be a registered collector, but if you're a registered collector, you are subject to random, unannounced, unwarranted searches of your home. To make sure that I mean, that's how far the mentality's gone. And I think that's what was at play in High River. It's just an extension of that.
And Lorne, even as you look at the Conservatives being far better with gun owners and collectors than the Liberals or the NDP would be, the Liberals having formed government, the NDP hoping to, you look at the mandatory minimums that they've brought in. The mandatory minimums for legal possession of a firearm, they don't make a distinction between the test case that overthrew the 3-year mandatory minimum jail sentence. They don't make a distinction between the gang member hanging outside a community center with an illegal handgun, with a magazine in it that is above and beyond what is legally allowed, with one in the chamber stuck down his pants, and someone that, oh, I went over by a week in not filling out my paperwork and getting it approved and back to me in time. I've been a law-abiding gun owner for years. They don't make that distinction. So even at the Conservative level, there is that decision that gun owners are somehow different. That needs to come to an end. There is a vast difference between a gang member and a law-abiding gun owner, and the sooner our politicians, regardless of political stripe, realize that, the better.
Yeah, I never thought I would agree with an Ontario Court of Appeal decision, but the one that overturned the mandatory minimum, I kind of agree with. Brian, thank you very, very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Time's up, but this story isn't finished. Sun News will continue to stay on the investigation until we bring you the full details behind what the RCMP did in High River last year. Until then, thanks for watching this Sun News special presentation, Broken Trust, The Fallout.
You did something without orders. You got in big trouble fast.
I stand by my comments that what the RCMP did was to secure communities to make sure that people were safe.
I'm very disappointed that the Premier doesn't seem to acknowledge that something went seriously wrong in High River.
The RCMP came into my home. They walked down, up the stairs, down the hallway, into a closet.
They call it safety, but, you know, I mean, it's a violation of privacy, in my opinion.
As soon as the media give up, then this issue will be buried.
Got you down.